In the discipline of philosophy, the question of what is real is the focus of metaphysics. Once we have an understanding of what is real, we then have to face another question: what is true? This is the focus of epistemology. When we have an understanding of the nature of reality in our environment, we then have to find harmony and congruence between the things that we observe in our environment and reality and the ideas and propositions that we formulate in our mind. The truth represents such congruence, and logic represents the process by which we do that. We use truth-value propositions to make valid statements about the real world. Truth-value propositions are not just our opinion. They need to be logical and non-contradictory. The truth is determined by the degree to which an idea adheres to what we observe in our world. As individuals, we try to navigate this world to survive and thrive. To that regard, we try to acquire valuable knowledge that can help us navigate this life with certainty and decisiveness. When we think of metaphysical concepts that come from the pre-Enlightenment philosophers such as Plato and René Descartes, and we compare it to our post-Enlightenment philosophers and ideas that come from such individuals such as Thomas Hobbes, Karl Popper, and Ayn Rand, what we identify is it's those ideas that came in the post-Enlightenment period that have allowed us to make truth-value propositions that tell us what is true and valid in our world. Why philosophers such as René Descartes and Plato have given us illustrious examples to understand the nature of reality and illusion and help us understand how we can be deceived, it is the post-Enlightenment ideas that really help get at validity. With the advent of the Enlightenment, the scientific method, and advances in our understanding of what is the nature of reality, what we now know is that knowledge is acquired through the evidence of the senses and logical frameworks that provide us with the best explanations for what we observe in the world that is around us. If our ideas contradict the evidence of the senses or logical frameworks, they need to be reworked. If there is a conflict between reality and the ideas in our mind, it is ultimately reality that wins. Understanding truth is the foundation to being empowered to fight against illusions and to understand the world for what it is. Knowledge can be acquired through logical frameworks and argumentation. Arguments can be categorized into two main categories: deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning uses a series of proofs to draw certain conclusions from a set of underlying premises. Deductive reasoning is all about formulating and analyzing the structure of arguments. It can give us conclusions with absolute proof of truth in a truth-value proposition, assuming that all of the premises are correct. Deductive reasoning represents the foundation for arguments from rationalists such as René Descartes. A classic proof that uses deductive reasoning to draw a conclusion from a set of premises is as follows. Premise 1. Humans are mortal. Premise 2. I am human. Conclusion. I am mortal. Here, if we agree that the initial two premises are valid, then we can draw that the conclusion, I am mortal, is inescapably true. If you find in a proof, however, that the conclusion appears inconsistent with what you observe in reality, then you need to rework and reassess your underlying premises. There are issues that need to be addressed when dealing with deductive reasoning. Overlapping categories can create issues if they are not addressed. I will give you an example. Premise 1. All fish live in water. Premise 2. All dolphins live in water. Conclusion. All dolphins are fish. Here, just because dolphins share a category with fish living in water, we can come to the false conclusion that all dolphins are fish. This is an example of the fallacy of affirming the consequent. This incorrectly infers category membership, fish, based upon a shared characteristic, living in water. Inductive reasoning allows us to make inferences based upon observed patterns. It is the foundation of the post-Enlightenment approaches that we've used to advance our understanding about how the universe works, including the use of the scientific method. With inductive reasoning, we attempt to draw general rules from specific instances. This requires us to observe rather than to derive foundational proofs. Unlike deductive reasoning, where we try to evaluate for certainty, with inductive reasoning, we are trying to assess for probabilities. Deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning are not entirely distinct. We can use both or a combination of them to get at certain conclusions or get a greater understanding of what is going on in the world around us and get us closer to truth. For an example, we can use inductive reasoning to identify consistency in climate and weather patterns to be able to draw the conclusion that today it is likely to rain. We might then use deductive reasoning to put on a raincoat as a means to keep us dry in the rain. We might use inductive reasoning to try on different raincoats to try to assess what is going to fit us better, but we ultimately don't need to experiment to know that raincoats keep us dry in the rain. When acquiring knowledge, we can face challenges in getting closer to the truth. A classic example of this was demonstrated by Edmund Gettier with his example of a broken clock. Let's say you're looking at a clock stuck at 10:02. You think it's 10:02 p.m. provided it's the evening. However, the clock is broken. If it was any other time other than 10:02 p.m., you might recognize the discrepancy between the true time and the time shown on the clock. And in that situation, you might come to an understanding that the clock is broken. However, if it was actually 10:02 p.m., your conclusion of the time would be correct, but for the wrong reasons. Agrippa's trilemma, otherwise known as Munchausen's trilemma, is a philosophical concept that challenges the possibility that we can draw absolute certainty about any position or belief. It put forth that any attempt to justify a truth-value proposition may ultimately face challenges in three domains: infinite regression, circular reasoning, or arbitrary assumptions to foundational beliefs. Infinite regression is the concept that justification in truth-value propositions will rely on other justifications ad infinity, leading to an endless chain of questions. Determining the origin of the universe can be a good example. What caused the creation of the universe? The Big Bang. What caused the Big Bang? Quantum fluctuations in a primordial vacuum. What caused the fluctuations in the primordial vacuum? David Deutsch has taken a different approach and a different lens to this concept of infinite regression and epistemology in his book, The Beginning of Infinity. When it comes to epistemology, Deutsch takes inspiration from Karl Popper and focuses on the concept that is fallibilism. Fallibilism is the idea that knowledge isn't just about seeking ultimate justification, as is considered in Agrippa's trilemma, but rather it is about creating the best explanations to solve problems. The best explanations are those that survive rigorous testing and criticism and solve problems better than their predecessors. Here, there is infinite potential to acquiring knowledge and gaining better understandings, which may not ultimately lead to what we consider an absolute truth. However, we can continuously improve our understanding of what is true and accurate. This concept of infinite potential overcomes and avoids the issue of ultimate justification that we face with Agrippa's trilemma and infinite regression. We also have to address the concept of circular reasoning. Imagine a YouTuber says that their channel is great because they have a lot of subscribers. And then you ask that same individual, well, why do you have so many subscribers? And that individual responds, because my videos are great. You see the issue here? This is an issue of circular reasoning. Nothing outside of the loop here is being used to justify either claim that is being put forward. Here, there's an attempt at an explanation, but the argument that is being put forward doesn't actually add any additional information. You are just going in an endless circle. The issue of circular reasoning can sometimes be addressed by a concept known as coherentism. Here, reasoning is not viewed in a non-trivial way, but rather the beliefs justify each other within a coherent system or web of beliefs. Now take the following example from my own clinical experience being a physician. I might have a belief that a patient has a diagnosis of epilepsy, and I might use a set of arguments that I put forward to get to this. The patient's clinical history may have a history of recent seizures. The patient may have undergone a diagnostic test, such as an electroencephalogram, that shows multifocal epileptiform discharges, which we can sometimes often see in patients who have epilepsy. This patient may have a family history of other family members that have a history of epilepsy and require anti-seizure medications. And I might start this patient on an anti-seizure medication, and after I do that, the patient's seizures stop. Each piece of evidence here reinforces the idea that this patient has epilepsy, and I may come to that conclusion because all of these beliefs fit together. Here, I might run into what is often referred to as the isolationist problem. What if this patient had an actual diagnosis of autoimmune encephalitis? Here, the justifications that I had remain internally coherent and led me to a diagnosis of epilepsy. However, those beliefs were disconnected from other possibilities because they were disconnected to the true diagnosis that the patient had. I came up with the wrong diagnosis for certain reasons. Here, in this situation, there is missed evidence. If I didn't account for the fact that this patient's seizures were more recent, if I didn't account for recent behavioral change, or if I didn't test for the appropriate autoantibodies, I might have come to the incorrect diagnosis of epilepsy while not getting at the correct diagnosis of acute autoimmune encephalitis. Here, the coherent system is internally consistent. However, it fails to reflect the patient's actual condition. This actually is not too uncommon of an issue that occurs in medicine. If you want to know more about autoimmune encephalitis, an example of a patient that experienced alternative or incorrect diagnoses before coming to a correct diagnosis of autoimmune encephalitis, there's a great book from Susan Callahan, Brain on Fire, that you can read. This has also been made into a movie that you can watch online. So how do you address the isolationist problem? One, you can expand the evidence base. In terms of a medical diagnosis, you can consider additional diagnostic tools to address the symptoms that you are seeing. Two, you can challenge the coherent system. Three, you can cross-validate what you're observing and what you think with external facts. And four, you can consider multiple coherent systems, which in medicine we can think of as the differential diagnosis, where we think of the most likely scenario, but we also consider other scenarios that can overlap and fit very closely to the system that we have that we're thinking about. The third issue to address in Agrippa's trilemma is arbitrary assumptions to foundational beliefs. Foundational beliefs serve as the ground floor for the basis of reasoning. They are the statements made where the chain of explanations stop. Foundational beliefs carry risk of assumptions. Let's give an example. Claim: the universe was created by a divine being. Justification: the divine being created the universe. Follow-up question: what created the divine being? Response: the divine being is eternal and uncreated. Here, the assumption that the divine being is eternal and uncreated is an arbitrary assumption because it is posited without evidence or justification. It halts further questioning without satisfying the demand for an explanation. There are ways of evaluating foundational beliefs for a stronger foundation against that which is arbitrary. In Ayn Rand's work, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, she holds her arguments toward knowledge upon the premise that existence exists. When it comes to foundational beliefs, the rationale for ceasing to provide further explanation to arguments is because either the belief is self-evident or axiomatic, indubitable, derived from sensory experience, or the axiom is logical in and of itself. A self-evident statement or axiom may be something along the lines of, a bachelor is an unmarried man. Here, the definition makes the statement self-evident. An indubitable statement may be something more along the lines of, I am currently having thoughts. Even if you are unsure about the world around you, you cannot doubt in that moment that you are thinking. A sensory experience may be something along the lines of, the stove feels hot when I touch it. This is a direct perception that doesn't really need any further reasoning to know that it is true. Self-defeating arguments can be a very powerful way of using foundationalism to identify justifications to foundational beliefs. They reveal principled assumptions that cannot be denied without contradiction. There are famous examples of this. René Descartes put forth the concept of cogito ergo sum, or what we know as I think, therefore I am. Here, even if you try to make the claim, I do not exist, the mere statement, I do not exist, contradicts the fact that you are making a statement that you can only do if you exist. This is therefore indubitable because denying it actually affirms it. Aristotle addressed the issue of the law of non-contradiction. Here, if you were to make the claim, the law of non-contradiction is false, you are needing to argue against the law by relying on the principle that two contradictory statements cannot both be true. Here, the law of non-contradiction is a prerequisite to coherent reasoning. Using the concept of argumentation ethics, Hans Hermann Hoppe described that by engaging in argumentation, the speaker exercises control over their body and mind, which presupposes self-ownership. If you try to make the claim, I do not own myself, you are exercising ownership over your body and mind. Here, self-ownership is necessary for argumentation, and the statement, I do not own myself, is contradictory. It's self-contradictory by its very action. This is a problem in and of itself. When it comes to knowledge acquisition and retention, reasoning can fall into the categories of internalism or externalism. Internalism represents the reasons and justifications in your mind about why you believe something. They tend to be explicit and more of your self-awareness of the thoughts that enter your mind that provide the rationale for the arguments that you put forward. These represent the type of arguments that you bring into a debate. Internalism is often the grounding for propositional knowledge, knowing what is true. Externalism represents the processes of knowledge acquisition and knowledge retention that you're not completely self-aware of. These are things that are more subliminal in nature that you may not be able to completely describe. These can be gut instincts or things that are subliminal and we've trained ourselves in, but we are not able to explicitly describe how we are able to rationalize what we do, yet we have them as skills. This can be being an effective and efficient basketball player at the three-point line. This can be music skills like playing the piano. While deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning provide us the foundation for acquiring knowledge, they may not always be the methods that we use to efficiently acquire new information. Sometimes we use other techniques without going to reasoning first. These processes, however, can be problematic. Testimony represents a source of knowledge that we can get from other individuals, such as gurus, mentors, from published papers, books, things that we try to absorb information from. This is convenient and helps accelerate our ability to learn new information, but it does have challenges that we need to address. We need to know how to trust testimony and use deductive and inductive reasoning as a process to take what is told to us and to validate and verify if those statements are true or false. In the modern world, we tend to use expert consensus and credentialism as a way of easily identifying whether certain statements or facts or certain propositional knowledge may be true. However, we do need to acknowledge that there can be significant issues in relation to this. A group of experts could have quite a bit of knowledge, but they also could have conflicts of interest, or they themselves could be subjected to some form of deception even to the information that they learned themselves. Such deception or such conflicts of interest can lead those experts to providing suspicious or inaccurate arguments to what they put forward. Memory can be a way of getting internal testimony, remembering facts and propositional knowledge that you had acquired previously at some point earlier in your life. This can be very helpful, but we also need to, if we're trying to pull information from our past, we need to make sure that what we remember was actually accurate to the way that we still remember it. With all knowledge, skepticism is needed. Authors like Karl Popper and David Deutsch have pointed out that epistemology and knowledge fundamentally exist to solve problems in our world. And in situations where we find problems, we need to formulate conjecture. These conjectures need to be held to rigor. They need to be held to experimentation and the idea of fallibility. From this, we can get the best explanations of either what we observe using inductive reasoning or what arguments are clearest and most sensible using deductive reasoning. Many philosophers advocate for a form of radical skepticism where we can't know anything for certain. This can be powerful for challenging intellectual assumptions and being open to the possibility that you can be wrong. But if we can't be 100% certain of anything, does that defeat the purpose of knowledge? According to philosophers and scientists like Karl Popper and David Deutsch, this is not an issue. Epistemology, just like the broader discipline of philosophy, is not just an academic exercise that we do in ivory towers. It is a tool that we use in our mind to solve the greatest problems that we face in our lives. Hi, I hope you enjoyed this video on epistemology. If you enjoy this content, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And you can check out my other videos that I've made thus far on why we need to study philosophy as well as metaphysics. I hope you have a great day.